Right, well, this is an Astor model of a Merchant Navy locomotive 35028 Clan Line, which was built by myself from a kit about 2 years ago. It took about 2 months to build from the kit. There's a lot of small parts, including many small screws the size of an ant or less, so quite a fiddly job. It's a very true model in the sense that it has all 3 cylinders and the full 3 sets of Walschaerts valve gear, which is fully operable, so it's quite a realistic model. The other thing that's realistic about it is that it does have a proper forced draft boiler. The steaming is dependent upon the amount of exhaust going out through the chimney, so you'll see that when I start firing it up, I will put a fan on the chimney to get it going, and once the pressure's come up a bit, it'll be able to take over with its own boiler pressure, blowing steam up through the chimney. So the first thing we're going to do is to put some oil in it, because the cylinders don't like to run dry, and so there's a little reservoir at the front of the engine, and some steam oil. And quite what distinguishes steam oil I'm not exactly sure, but it's steam oil, so there we are, we've got some steam oil. So put a little bit of that in this reservoir. Try not to get it all over the place. It's just about fine. And just in case I drop the cap on the ground, I do have a spare. The way this lubricator works is that there's a little bit of steam bleeds into it, and it condenses, and of course it forms a pool of water under the oil, and it floats the oil up. So as the Loco goes and steam continues condensing in there, it continues to push oil up, out and into the steam flow. So that's the lubricator. Next job is to fill the tender with water. So we'll just do that, and pour it everywhere as well while we're at it, just to make sure, for good measure and all that sort of thing. Now, I'm now rummaging around looking for something. What I'm looking for, there's a handle that goes on this, there's a hand pump in the tender to fill the boiler. Voila! The handle. This goes on this little pump in the tender, and you probably won't be able to see it, but if we look inside the cab, there's a gauge glass, and I'll be looking to see that I've got water in the boiler. These gauge glasses are tricky because they always get bubbles in them, and you never really know whether they're telling you the truth or not. So when the engine's running, what I'm going to be looking for is a couple of things. One, I'll be looking for to make sure the water level in the tender is going down, which means that water's being pumped into the boiler. And the other thing I'll be looking for is, we'll probably see the occasional puff of water come out of the safety valves, and that's alright with me. I'd rather the boiler was too full than dry. I'm hand pumping at the moment, but when the engine is running, it'll pump itself. There's a little pump underneath attached to one of the axles that pumps water into the boiler, and the pump is designed to more than keep up with the rate the boiler uses steam. So the other thing is, there's a little valve down here that you can open, which allows you to bypass some of the water and actually send some water back to the tender. So the idea is to try to get it balanced, try to get the usage of water balanced with the rate that it's and I can see the water level is actually coming up. I can see it rising in the glass, which is good news. That's what we want. This Loco is true to prototype in as much that it uses a lot of water. coming up pretty steadily now. Right, we're near the top of the glass, so that's where I want to be. And we'll fill the tender again. Right, and before we even go any further, I'll now fill this bottle back up. Make sure I've got water available. And the water I'm using is distilled water. Some people use rainwater, but it's just as easy to use distilled water, and they sell it in the food store, so why not? And the reason, of course, for using distilled water is we don't want scale forming in the boiler. So the next part of the job is to put some fuel in it. So this Loco, like many, is run on what the British call methylated spirit, and so there's a tank in the tender to hold the spirit, and it's fed into the Loco through a tube that runs underneath into 3 big wicks, and the way it works is what's called a chicken feed. So the fuel comes down through this little jet here, and the air comes back into the tank through this tube. So when the spirit level rises above the sort of cutoff on this tube, it stops the fuel from flowing. So that's how it regulates the level. Very simple, very effective. Next thing I'm going to do is to turn on the radio control, and we'll just make sure that we've actually got some activity there, and we haven't yet, so just check out what's going on with that, since it was working earlier. There we are. Right, so this is the regulator that controls the steam going into the cylinders, and the other one, which you can just see in the corner there, is what's called the blower, and that's what controls the steam that's blown straight up the chimney to force the draft in the boiler. So we'll put the tank back. And there's a little valve to shut off the flow completely, and we'll undo the cap. And we'll fill it with spirit. Right, so that stops the air going into the tank directly. So now we can open this valve, and you won't be able to see it, but fuel's just started flowing through the tube across into the wick, so I'll just let that wet the wick, as it were. Right, so I'm going to put the fan on the exhaust, get a draft going, and I'm going to, there's 3 wick tubes underneath, and you might be able to see these if you get up close. See, I'm pointing at one with the 1, 2, 3. And we'll go ahead and see if we can get this to light. Now we're just going to wait for steam pressure to start rising. You can see there's a gauge in there. So the operating pressure of the locomotive is 4 bar, or about 60 pounds per square inch, and once it reaches about half pressure, that's 30 pounds per square inch, I'll be able to open the blower and take the fan off, because there'll be enough pressure in the boiler then to drive steam straight up the chimney and force the draft in the boiler. The other thing for the people who do have technical knowledge about these engines is, again, like the real thing, it has a multiple jet blast pipe. So it's a pretty accurate model. Okay, so we're now showing about half pressure, and I'm going to open the blower, and there you go. I'll take the fan off. So the steam coming out of the chimney at the moment is just live steam straight from the boiler from a jet specifically there to force the draft. Okay, I'm going to give her a little bit of a push, otherwise we're just wasting fuel. And you'll see lots of water come out of the chimney. Let's go. Yeah, so what's happening is the Loco's just started steaming, and of course the cylinders are completely cold. So when the steam enters them, it basically just condenses into water, so there's not a lot of force available. And of course you've also got to try and throw that water out of the chimney. Once it gets hot, it'll start to run much more effectively. And in fact it's getting there now. It's just coming down the straight and gaining quite a good bit of speed. So it's just beginning to climb now, and I'm going to start slowing her down. As I slow her down, I will open the blower to keep the draft on the boiler. Yeah, so what you just saw was the Loco starting a fairly heavy train from a standstill on a 1 in 100 gradient and curves. So it's true to form, except the wheels weren't slipping. If it was if it's the full-size Loco, the wheels would probably have been slipping like crazy, unless the driver knows what he's doing, which a lot of them don't. I didn't say that, did I?